Angelicus and Equations here. Sperb.
Hello and welcome very much to our 17th episode of Sperb Herbs. We're getting up there in numbers. I'm really excited about that. I didn't think it was going to get that high, but we are doing well. And today's episode, we are going to be talking about herbs that cool and release the exterior. This is one of our podcasts. We're talking about a whole group of herbs, a whole subgrouping of herbs, rather than an individual going into depth into an individual. And that gives us an opportunity to kind of talk about some of some Chinese medicine in the background. By the way, I've never mentioned this. I should tell you, I say Chinese medicine because most of this medicine is even if it's Japanese style or Korean style or Vietnamese style, they've derived from Chinese medicine, and the word Oriental is sort of on the outs, and so I tend not to use that word. And I mean Chinese medicine in a very magnanimous and open way, not just from China, but also encompassing all these other traditions as well. So anyways, enough of that. Let's get into herbs that cool and release the exterior. So if you are an acupuncturist, this podcast, as well as others, are approved for California Acupuncture Board Continuing Education Units and National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine Professional Development Activities at a reasonable cost. Please check us out at integrativemedicinecouncil.org. That's Integrative Medicine Council, COUNCIL.org. I have also written a couple of books, Integrative Pharmacology, combining modern pharmacology with integrative medicine, as well as, and that was with Bob Flaws. And I've also written Playing the Game, a step-by-step guide to accepting insurance as an acupuncturist. And I did that with Tiffany Hefner. And those are both really nice books. I have a third book that's ready to go. I just haven't figured out exactly how and where I'm going to publish it yet, but it's coming soon. Both of these books are available at the shop on the menu on www.spurbsherbs.com. All right. So we're going to start, as you know, with each of these podcasts, we start off with something a little different, something that's not really about the episode, but is tangentially involved with the episode. And we've done lots of interesting things over the 17 episodes. But today we're going to continue our conversation of external causes of disease. Way back in episode 7, so 10 episodes ago, of Sperb Herbs about warm and release the exterior herbs. Today we're doing cool and release the exterior herbs. We discussed external causes of diseases and touched on the concept of wind, signs and symptoms, and two important theories in Chinese medicine about how wind can penetrate to the interior. And those two are the 6 stages and the 4 levels. 6 stages focuses on how wind cold enters the body, while the 4 levels focuses on how wind heat enters the body. So 6 stages wind cold, 4 levels wind heat. As today's category of herbs are used to treat wind heat, I thought it would be useful to discuss and go more in depth about the 4 levels. We just touched on it on 7th episode. So here we're going to go a little bit deeper. But before we start, this might be a good time to go back and listen to that 7th episode and remind yourself of what wind is and how it can affect us. Okay, with that completed, let's start a discussion of the Wenbing theory and the 4 levels. So Wenbing theory. So first of all, this is my first Chinese of this episode. I always do this. I've had several years of Chinese, but my pronunciation still is not very good. And I apologize ahead of time. I'm doing the best I can. So here we go. The story of Wenbing, or warm disease theory, starts with the Shanghan Lun. So the Shanghan Lun. The Shanghan Lun is one of, if not the earliest extant books on Chinese herbal formulas. It really is considered foundational, and if not the first, definitely the most important initial book on herbal formulas, not necessarily herbs, but herbal formulas. It was written by Zhang Jing as one book in the 2nd century CE called the Shanghan Bing Lun on cold damage and miscellaneous diseases. That's what Shanghan Lun actually stands for, is on cold damage, is basically what Shanghan Lun means. But originally it was a whole big book And then and it was translated as on cold damage and miscellaneous diseases. In a one-sentence summary, the Shanghang describes how a cold pathogen enters the body and causes disease as it penetrates deeper into the body. The Wenbing, or warm disease theory, developed much later in Chinese medical history than many other currently used approaches. It really is sort of one of the last major theories in Chinese medicine that is still practiced. Lots of dynamism and a lot of stuff happening in Chinese medicine, but this is one of the major threads and theories that, and the last in the development, really. It is a set of theories developed by several doctors, authors, rather than a single specific author or book. So that makes it very different than a lot of the other theories that are in Chinese medicine. Often they have a single progenitor, and then there were people who developed those disciples and adherents and things along those lines over centuries would develop those theories and do that. In this case, with Wenbing theory, it wasn't a single author. It was more like a group over time that kind of developed this whole sort of canon of the Wenbing theory. It was first proposed by Wang Lu in the 14th century CE. So remember, Shanghang was written in the 2nd century. So this was 1,200 years later in the 14th century that the Wenbing theory was very first started, and it actually is developed strongly over the next several centuries. So it isn't really complete for several more centuries still. But it was first proposed with the thought that warm diseases were not caused by cold invasion, but could be caused by direct invasion of a warm pathogen. So basically, the idea here is that for most of the history of Chinese medicine, they thought cold was the pathogenic force that caused a lot of internal damage. And then when you read some of this, one of the authors actually says, well, the nature of disease has changed. It's been a long time since we had, since the Shanghang was written, and the nature of disease is different now, over 1,000 years later, than it was back then. And now we actually see more warm diseases coming into play rather than cold diseases. So what's interesting about Chinese medicine also is that theories don't replace other theories, and they don't negate other theories. In other words, Shanghang is very much an active approach to Chinese medicine today. Even though it's almost 2,000 years old, of course it's been modified and expanded upon and all that, but it's still very, very important. In fact, when I went to one of my mentors and I said, how do I step up my game? His first and only response was, you've got to know the Shanghang. And this was, last year that I asked him for that. So this is really recent. So Shanghang very much in place. So Wenbing doesn't replace the Shanghang, but it expands and is a different theory and a different way to deal with disease in modern times. So it's very interesting. And that's very common in Chinese thought, that old theories don't go away. They just, they wax and wane in their importance. And it's not like a new theory is designed to destroy an old theory. So for example, one of those is there is the purgative. There's a whole approach to purgatives and how most diseases need to have some purging in order to be effective. And that was written, over 1,000 years ago, and is still in play, but not incredibly popular. But still used on occasion, and the formulas still, some of the formulas are used for particular cases. So it's not gone away. It's just not as popular as it was. Sorry, that was my watch that said that. Okay. So the Wenbing is a set of theories developed by several doctors. Oh, I already said that. Okay, so we're done with this one. Okay, thank you. There were more, the Wenbing theory was more fully developed during the Qing dynasty, which lasted from 1644 to 1911. So even though it started in the 14th century, there was, it still spent a lot of, several centuries before it was fully developed. And it wasn't probably fully developed until the 17th, 18th century. And even in the, as we get into the later Qing dynasty, probably not a lot was added to it, but some was, and so it's still, and even today it's being applied to modern diseases that are new, so it's still being developed at this point. So, as we mentioned, instead of the 6 stages of the Shanghanlong, Wenbing theory discusses the 4 levels. These levels are from external to internal and are based on physiological aspects of the body. And these include the protective or wei level, the qi level, the nutritive or yin level, and the blood or shui level. The protective level is considered external, while the other 3 levels are internal. So as opposed to cold diseases, warm diseases generally have fever at an early stage. Generally, fever appears later in cold diseases as the body starts to mount a defense. It's sort of a defense to cold, but because it's cold, it doesn't trigger a fever response until later in the disease process. There are 3 other key clinical features to warm diseases. 1, symptoms appear very quickly. So one of the books said that at symptoms appear very quickly. So like the Shanghanlong cold will take hours to develop, while Wenbing, heat, can take minutes to develop. So very quickly. If you've ever had one of those things where you went to sleep and you felt really good and you woke up and had a really bad sore throat, that would be in line with the warm sort of disease attack. Number 2, heat signs and symptoms predominate. Makes sense. If it's a heat pathogen coming in, then we would expect a lot of heat symptoms. And 3, the heat can injure fluids and yin. And this becomes one of the biggest issues. As it goes deeper, we see more and more damage occurring to these fluids and yin. And that's the main thing that makes these pathogens really detrimental, especially as it goes internal into the person. So we're not going to get into huge discussion of what yin is or isn't, but one of the ways that we can look at it in the body is it is our fluids, it is our cooling system, it is our substance, those sort of things. At some point, I'm going to have one of these things talk about yin, yang, and qi, and get into a lot of depth on those concepts. But we're not quite there yet. But so yin is a lot of different aspects of the body, but it's incredibly important. In fact, the 4 substances, which are the key substances to the body, we've now talked about almost all of them. Yin and yang, which is one we haven't quite talked about, but qi and blood. Those are the 4 substances. They need to be conserved, and they're incredibly vital for life. So the warm diseases as well have a tendency to be contagious, seasonal, so they are worse in certain seasons, and generally they say spring is probably one of the worst because that's when wind is at its most, and so the wind will carry the heat into the body. So seasonal, I would say spring and winter and summer because of the heat aspect of it. They're endemic. In other words, they are very prevalent in locations, and they're epidemic. So endemic means it's more common in a particular area. For example, warm, humid places have a tendency to damp heat conditions. So that would be an endemic sort of condition. An epidemic means it affects many people in the same area in a relatively short time. And of course, right now, as we are still in the COVID epidemic, I think we're all very, actually it's not an epidemic, it's a pandemic, which means it's everywhere, as opposed to epidemic, but we are very aware of these sort of situations at this point. And I do think if you were to look at COVID-19 from a Chinese medical point of view, this would be the lens that you would be looking at it through, which would be the Wenbing theory, more so than many other sort of lenses that are possible to look at it through. Warm diseases have an acute onset and have remarkable heat symptoms at the beginning. So that's that fast, acute onset. It doesn't take a while. It's not chronic. And there's remarkable heat symptoms. Heat symptoms include high fever, thirst, irritability, restlessness, dark urine, red tongue, and a rapid pulse. So we haven't really talked about pulses much in these things, but a rapid pulse would be, from a Western point of view, that's over 100 beats per minute. In Chinese medicine, we don't put quite a number on it. It's more like it feels rapid and is more rapid than it should be. But 100 beats per minute isn't a bad one, for a bad definition for a rapid pulse. Heat injures the yin and fluids and can become internal and attack organs with various manifestations. So depending on the organs and how it attacks them, there can be lots of other symptoms. So this is just broad symptoms right now. They can become a lot more specific as we go into them. So let's talk about qi for example. Before we get into the 4 levels, let's quickly discuss qi, because qi is sort of a key concept in Chinese medicine. It's very difficult. We're going to be talking about 3 different types of qi here. So if we don't have some basic idea of what qi is, we're going to have some trouble talking about the 4 levels, because 3 of those 4 levels involve qi in some way. So qi is a key concept in Chinese medicine, and I think qi is very misunderstood in most people's thoughts. One of my biggest bugaboos is qi is not energy. It is not, and that's often how it's translated. The energy of the body, and it's the energy flow, and it's this, and it's no, absolutely 100% no. It is energetic, yes, it is very energetic, but it is not energy. So I think a better metaphor for qi is steam. And again, I'm going to do a thing at some point and really get into qi and focus on qi and look at the character, because I think that tells you a lot about what qi is. But a better metaphor for qi is steam. Steam is warm, it's moving, it's light, it's energetic. There's that energetic word, with some, but not much physicality. So it does have matter. Qi, it does have matter in Chinese medical thinking. It's just not a lot of qi, but it's a lot of force. Steam can produce work, which is how qi works in the body. So think of steam, before we had, gasoline engines, we had steam locomotives. So steam is very energetic and forceful and moving and can get a lot accomplished, but it doesn't have a ton of physicality to it. So that is a much better, I think, metaphor for qi. And when I teach this to my students, I would always, and I had the first class in the program, so I would teach it, it was the very first time they would really start talking about qi. And I would say, look, I'm going to spend the next hour talking to you about what qi is and what it isn't, and then you're going to spend the rest of your life understanding it. It's not a concept that you can just get in a 5-minute conversation. You start to see different manifestations and different ways it's used. One of the ways I like to use qi, which is very interesting and probably just disrupt everything I just said, is I think there's an exchange of qi whenever there is a social a meeting of some sort. And so looking at that qi that's flowing between 2 or more people is really fascinating. You start to see where some of the manifestations of disease are if you kind of think about social interactions as an exchange of qi. And some people will hog the qi and some people will overwhelm it. And it's just a very interesting way to kind of look at conversations. But that's one way. And the other thing is, in qi in Chinese medicine, in Chinese thought, in Chinese language, it's actually atmosphere. It's used. Every word for weather, different types of weather, has the word qi in it. It's a compound word, or I don't know about everyone, but most of them. And so it is very pervasive in everything, and it should be thought of in that context. So anyways, as usual, I probably made it more confusing than less confusing, but that's normal when talking about qi. All right, let's move on. There are different kinds of qi based on where it is located, what it does, how it affects humans and the environment, and not all qi is good. We're going to talk about some not good qi coming up in just a little bit in our discussion. So remember, qi, one of the ways I was described, qi is a combination of yin and yang. And so with yin and yang, we have good and bad, we have light and dark, we have this duality. So qi has that duality as well. In our discussion today, we need to discuss several types of qi. So first up, we're going to talk about wei, or protective qi. This qi circulates in the outer aspects of our body and has a relationship with our lungs. It warms and nourishes the skin and muscles, controls the opening and closing of the skin pores, and guards the body from external pathogens. So I think of the wei qi as little soldiers sitting on our skin, ready to fight off any invaders. That's one way that I look at it. Of course, it's not the only thing. It warms and nourishes the skin and muscles. So it's very important, that sort of thing. Wei is, some people say it's in between the outer layers of the skin and our muscle layers, so it lives in there. I've actually heard some Chinese people say that Chinese authors, I shouldn't say Chinese people, Chinese authors say that it's right on the surface, and some liken it to the aura that some people can see. I'm not sure I'm into that, but that it some people say it extends outwards from our skin and can protect us from things before it actually gets on our skin. I think that's getting a little esoteric, but for some people I think that resonates, and so I want to mention it. Another type of qi that we're going to talk about today is nutritive qi. And nutritive qi nourishes the body, so it's important in that case. So both protective and nutritive qi are derived from food. So we get our both of these, the nutritive and the wei qi, from our food. So if we don't eat well, we do not have good nutritive or wei qi, and so we're weaker. And if we can't digest well, same sort of consequences. So nutritive qi circulates in the vessels, the meridians of Chinese medicine, and nourishes the organs. So this is the qi that actually kind of supplements and nourishes and makes sure the organs are healthy. And it is a precursor to and circulates with the blood. So that's important as well. There's a saying in Chinese medicine where qi goes, blood follows, or sometimes it's the other way around, where blood goes, qi follows. But qi is usually considered sort of the motive and nutritive force of the blood. They go hand in hand. You can't, if you're blood deficient, you have to supplement qi as well as blood, sort of thing, in a lot of our formulas, so very important. There are some other kinds of qi which we'll mention in just a few. We now have enough background to discuss the 4 levels, so let's get into the 4 levels real quick here. So the first level that we're talking about is called the wei fen, which is protective level, the protective level. So this is the protective qi level. The lung governs the movement and distribution of protective qi, especially along the surface of the body, nose and throat. So that's important, the nose and throat, because where do we actually usually get a bad cold from? It's usually from our nose and throat. That's where we have invade. So when the body encounters a warm pathogen, there's a struggle between it and the protective qi. So the protective qi goes, nope, you're not invading here. Let's send protective qi to the area. Let's deal with this. And that's when you start to get some of the symptoms coming on. Remember, a lot of our symptoms in disease is the body's way to protect itself. And that's what's happening here at the protective level, the wei fen. This causes stagnation and failure of the lung to disperse the protective qi to the surface, nose, and throat. So because of this struggle, because of this battle, we're not able to circulate the protective qi as well as we should. And then when that happens, we start to get lots of signs and symptoms of this battle going on. And these include fever, chills, and slight aversion to cold, slight or absent perspiration, sneezing, nasal congestion, sinus drainage, sore throat, cough, headache, slightly increased thirst, so not abundant, but a little bit extra thirst, and a red-tipped tongue. So if you look at the tongue, the very tip of it is red. The normal tongue is pink, so you usually can kind of tell when something's much redder than that, and it's at the tip of it, and has a thin white coat. So we talk a lot in Chinese medicine about the coat of the tongue, and a lot of us rightfully will brush our coat off, so you have to be a little bit careful with that. But if you look, you don't brush your tongue, you can still brush your teeth, but don't brush your tongue for a couple days, you'll see there's a little coat on the tongue, and that's what we're referring to here. So of those signs and symptoms, there are 3 that are particularly indicative of the protective level. The first one is a fever. So without a fever, it's really hard to say that we're at protective level. It's important to have a fever. That slight aversion to cold is there too. And chills. You know, it's that the reason why you get chills and a slight aversion of cold is because it's still on the exterior, and your body's kind of feeling it that way. When it goes inside, we don't have that slight aversion to cold anymore. So that's important for the wei level. And then finally, that slightly increased thirst. Other levels that we're going to be talking about are much more than that slightly increased thirst. You do have to have some increased thirst, but not much. And those three things together are particularly indicative of the protective level. So after the protective level, if the warm pathogen continues to penetrate, we hit the qi fun, or the qi level. As the warm heat pathogen starts to penetrate deeper into the body, starts to affect the function and circulation of qi. So this is our general circulation of qi, and now that's starting to have a problem. It starts to stagnate, and when in Chinese medicine, when anything stagnates and stops, it generates heat. And so because it sits there and kind of builds on itself, so it gets some heat going. Organs are now affected at the qi level, and the first of these affected are the lungs, which makes sense because that's our first organ of protection from the outside. So the lungs are often, when we have an external attack, the first organs to be affected. The spleen is also affected as the worm heat pathogen goes in. And then all of the yang organs can be affected as well. So in Chinese medicine, we have yin organs, we have yang organs, and the yang organs can be affected. The yang organs we call, we say they're hollow organs, and those include the small and large intestines, the gallbladder, the stomach, the urinary bladder, and a unique organ that we have in Chinese medicine called the triple burner. Again, that'll be something I get into at some point, but we aren't going to mention the triple burner again before we finish this episode. So keep that in mind. So common signs and symptoms of the qi level or the qi fun include vigorous fever. So instead of now fever, now it's big fever. Aversion to heat. So instead of that slight aversion to cold, now we have full-on aversion to heat. We don't want heat. Profuse perspiration. So instead of a little bit of perspiration, now we have just drenching perspiration. And thirst, not slightly increased thirst, now thirst, big thirst, with a preference for cold beverages, a yellow and dry tongue coating. So it may still be red, especially at the tip, but that coating that we're talking about is now yellow and dry rather than wet. And it's no longer thin, it's sort of a normal, and it's not white anymore. And a flooding or slippery pulse. So again, getting into pulses is really important in Chinese medicine. It's how we diagnose things, but we're not going to get in. There's 28 different pulse qualities, and it is one of those things, again, I say to my students is when I teach this is like, all right, I'm teaching you the pulses. You're going to spend the rest of your career really mastering them. So it takes a long time to master them, but flooding or slippery pulse is the pulse that we look for here. And of those, the big signs that are specific for qi feng, when you have these, you're pretty much, you're at the qi level, is that aversion to heat, that thirst, and the yellow and dry tongue coating. Those three things together are really indicative of this qi level. And then the other thing about qi level is it can be broken down and have organ-specific manifestations. So when it affects a specific organ, it has a whole other set of symptoms on top of these symptoms as well. Again, that's a little bit too much for us to get into here, but we do need to remember that happens too, that this is when we start to see organs being affected by the worm pathogen. It has penetrated and is now affecting our organs. So the next level is the Ying Fun, the nutritive level. Ying Fun. A level deeper than the qi level is the nutritive level, which indicates a deeper penetration of the pathogen. And now we are starting to cause injury to the yin and disturbance of the heart. So remember, the qi level is the lung and spleen. Now we're damaging the heart. We're getting the heart. And in Chinese medicine, the heart is very important, just like it is in Western medicine. It's considered the emperor organ, and all the other organs kind of help support it. So signs and symptoms of the nutritive level include fever that worsens at night, a thin, rapid pulse. Thin is an indication of the width. Like when you feel it, it feels thinner than a normal pulse does. Insomnia, irritability, restlessness, occasional delirium or muddled consciousness, a deep red tongue. So now it's not the coat, it's the actual tongue. It's now all red, it's deep red. And then there's thirst with little desire to drink, which is interesting. So we had full-on thirst with the qi level. Here we have thirst with little desire to drink. And the reason for that is because we can't really handle the excess, all the fluids coming in. We need the fluids, but we don't. Our bodies our organs are starting not to process it as well. And then maculopapular rashes is another one. So maculopapular rashes is a combination of two words, macular, which is indicative of a coloration, a discoloration in a rash, and papular, which means that it's slightly raised. So what a maculopapular rash is a slightly raised, discolored rash is really what we're talking about. And generally with macules and papulars, they're both under 1 centimeter, so under a little less than a half an inch. So they're small little things. And in this case, with this nutritive level, we would expect it to be sort of blood colored, a little bit on the red or pink side would be the discolorations, though macula doesn't necessarily mean a specific color. So those are the signs and symptoms that we're looking at with the nutritive level. The signs that are particularly indicative of the nutritive level are fever that worsens at night. So we call that a tidal fever, and that's important. That indicates that the yin is being affected, and that's the problem here with the nutritive level. It's gone much deeper and is much more serious than the chi level. So that's that. Irritability, and it is in restlessness. These two are important, and they're indications of the heat that's happening. And muddled consciousness, that occasional delirium and muddled consciousness. Things are just a little off and you can't concentrate. That's not a good sign, and that is a cardinal sign here. And of course, the deep red tongue is another fantastic clue that we're at the nutritive level. So do you need all those things that we've been talking about as indicative? No, because this is what I like to call book learning. It's rare that you see a patient that's by the book. But if some of those and no other major other signs will indicate that you're at this nutritive level. Just the deep red tongue alone would put you at this nutritive level in the 4 levels. All right, and that brings us to our final level, the shui fun, the blood level. This level is when the pathogen is penetrated deeply and disturbs and exhausts the blood and is considered a critical condition. This is a life-threatening condition. So this is one of the problems with as an acupuncturist in the United States and in a lot of the areas of the world. We won't see this. They're in the hospital. We're not treating these conditions, so we don't see them. But if we do see them, we got to do something with them really badly. So extreme heat can cause the blood to exit the vessels and cause blood stasis. That's what's happening here, and it basically means it's bad. And I always think of the disease I think of when I think of these are the hemorrhagic diseases. There's a bunch of them, but of course the one that I've kind of studied a little bit more than the others is Ebola, where at the very end stages the person is bleeding out of every orifice and skin's cracked and they're flailing around trying to get the blood everywhere so it can actually make someone else sick. And that's what I think of as the extreme blood level, and then they die. So we're talking extreme here with this blood level. So signs and symptoms include fever, restlessness, delirium, muddled consciousness, or coma, very deep red tongue. So it's not just deep red, it's now very deep red tongue. Loss of blood, which includes vomiting blood, nosebleeds, bloody urine, and blood in the stools. And those maculopapular rashes are over the entire body. So basically, the blood isn't staying in the vessels. It's going everywhere it shouldn't. That's the idea, and that's why it's called the blood level, because the blood is so affected by this. The key signs here are that very deep red tongue, the loss of blood, however it manifests, and that those maculopapular rashes all over the body. Those 3 things are critical for the blood level to diagnose the blood level. All right, so I think we're good with that. Let's step back into the when being theory a little bit. Those are the 4 levels: the wei, the qi, the yin, and the shui. So there are 3 other very interesting concepts that stem from when being theory. The first is of li qi, or pestilential epidemic qi. This is a pathogenic factor that is infectious, occurs suddenly, and progresses quickly. And that is a type of that bad qi that I was talking about. And that is absolutely what we would kind we would say COVID is. It's this pestilential or epidemic. I say pestilential / epidemic. It's the same word, just different translations of the same word into English. So epidemic chi is the word that I often see, but I think now we're kind of settling on pestilential as the more appropriate translation for Chinese medicine practitioners. So yeah, COVID is right in there. Another interesting concept is that of lurking or hidden pathogenic qi. This is a concept widely used to treat various interesting modern diseases such as Lyme disease or autoimmune diseases with Chinese medicine. So this hidden pathogenic qi, this idea of it stems from Wenbing theory, and it was developed in the context of the Wenbing theory. So that's a good one. And the third concept is the concept of Sanjiao or triple burner pattern of diseases. So we've talked about 4 levels. A whole nother way to look at diseases is through the triple burner Sanjiao patterns of diseases. I'm not getting into that at this point. We'll do that on a future episode. But those are 3 really interesting concepts that come out of Wenbing theory and make it very relevant to modern day Chinese medicine as we practice it. So, all right. So that was a quick, or maybe not so quick, overview of Wenbing theory. Of course, there's a lot more to explore and a lot more depth to get into. The herbs we are about to discuss can be useful for treating the first of the 4 levels, the Wei Fun or protective level. That's all we're talking about is that first level when it's still pretty much out on the surface and we're in battle with it. And with that, and no further ado, let's get into our herbs for this episode, herbs that cool and release the exterior. The herbs in this category are primarily used to treat wind heat. We talked a bit about wind in that 7th episode. It is one of the 6 climactic factors and is usually combined with another factor such as cold, damp, heat, or dryness when it quote unquote attacks from the outside. In our category of herbs today, we're going to be discussing wind heat, which often causes severe fever with mild chills and sore throat. Many of the herbs in this category are also used to vent rashes, which is interesting because we think of rashes often as being from heat, and or treat eye problems due to wind heat. So interesting, venting rashes and eye problems are also, a lot of these herbs are treated. Generally, I use 3 good source textbooks when discussing individual herbs. This is great because they don't always agree, and it's in those disagreements that we learn and expand our knowledge. So I really love that. I love it when I find a conflict. And given this, they don't even agree on the name of the category of this herbs. So Bensky et al. From 2004 calls it cool, acrid herbs that release the exterior. So that's what they call it. Chen and Chen calls it wind heat releasing herbs. So it doesn't even mention the exterior at all, and it doesn't mention spicy or cool. And then Brand and Wiseman call it cool, acrid, exterior resolving medicinal. So that's very similar to Bensky, but it's exterior resolving rather than releasing the exterior. So a slightly different context to that. So close. They're similar, but not exactly the same. They are similar, the category names are similar, though I think they emphasize slightly different aspects of what the herbs do. And these herbs do have a lot of similarities with each other. They're all cool in nature, which of course counteracts the warm nature of the pathogen, hence why we want that coolness. They are acrid, spicy, pungent, and these are all synonyms in Chinese medicine, acrid, spicy, pungent. So sometimes you'll see the word acrid, sometimes you'll see spicy, sometimes you'll see pungent, all the same. But what these acrid, spicy, pungent herbs do is they scatter and expel or release or push out pathogenic factors. The force of it is scattering, and it scatters from the inside to the outside. That's the idea of what spicy foods do. And if you doubt this at all, how about after this episode, after you finish listening to this episode, go get something super hot. I don't know what it is, Mexican food or hot chicken, spicy chicken, whatever it is. Get something really hot, and just really hot. And what do? You sweat. Your pores open up and go out. That's what spice does, basically. Universally, these herbs disperse wind heat to treat externally contracted cold. That's the whole purpose of what these herbs do. So let's get into the individual herbs in this category. We're going to just briefly mention them and then we'll compare them a little bit as we go along. So the first herb in this category in all the books is bohe, which is Menthe haplocalicis herba. Haplocalicis herba. That's mint, field mint. I love bohe. It's one of my favorite herbs because I like mint. So, and you can grow this in your backyard. In fact, that's the picture that was at the beginning of this webinar. Was the picture on all the things is mint. So what mint does is it clears and benefits the head, eyes, and throat. So it's really good for the throat. Vents rashes and courses the liver and moves qi. It's this last one, the courses the liver, moves qi, makes it a very commonly used herb for a number of reasons, but often because it has that liver sort of action to it. So it's really good. So for me, when I have a patient call up and they don't have herbs, I have herbs that are really good for colds. And I often will recommend them, my patients have them in their house, but often they'll call me up like on a Friday night where I'm not going to be able to see them for a few days and they're coming down with a cold. And then what I will often recommend that they do is drink peppermint tea and with ginger. Ginger is in that other category of herbs that we talked about when it's good for when cold, and bohe is good for when heat attacks. So between the two of them, I don't know what's going on. It could be either or generally, and I think a nice cup of tea with some slices of fresh ginger and some peppermint is really good to kind of help you feel better when you're starting to get a cold. So that's my first advice is to do that. So love bohe, especially if the throat is involved. Aces. So, Bongza arctii fructus also benefits the throat, resolves toxicity and vents rashes, and moistens the intestines. So, Neobongza, Z means seed. Even though this is arctii fructus, which means the fruit, it actually is a seed, a little bit of a seed. And all seeds in Chinese medicine actually help to moisten the intestine. So because of the oils in the seeds and what have you. So that's where that comes in. It's not necessarily one of the first herbs we would think about for moistening the intestines, but it's definitely there. This next herb is a cool herb. Chan Tui, Cicada periostracum. This is an interesting herb as it is the moltings of the cicada bug. And as I'm writing this, we're having one of the broods coming out. I think it's brood 17 or 12. I can never remember, but the 17-year cycle is out right now in the south, not where I'm at. So this is the periostracum. This is the moltings of it. It vents rashes, clears the eyes, and stops spasms. It's a very interesting herb and useful. And it's not really an herb. It's an animal sort of product. Sangya morifolium. Calms the liver, clears the eyes, clears the lungs and moistens dryness, cools the blood, and stops bleeding for mild cases of vomiting of blood. So that's Sangya morifolium. That's a good herb. Ju Hua, chrysanthemum floss. This is chrysanthemum flower. So if you can get this, and it's a good thing to do. It calms the liver, clears the eyes, extinguishes wind in cases of dizziness, headaches, and deafness with liver yang rising, and clears heat and resolves toxicity. This is a very commonly used herb, especially when there's an external attack of wind heat. And not only that, when I was traveling in China, I saw this everywhere. Every older person had a cup of tea with chrysanthemum flowers in it, and that was and I asked, I knew what they did, but I asked my tour guide, I was like, why is everyone drinking those? And they all say because it helps the eyes. That's what my tour guides would say. So very, very useful for cleaning the eyes, very strongly helps the eyes, benefits the eyes, and something that you can certainly drink as a tea, and they do all day long to help with that. Our next herb is Mang Jingzi, our Viticus fructus, and this clears and benefits the head and eyes, relieves pain by draining dampness and expelling wind. Moving on, we have Dan Do Qi, which is Soje semen preparatum. This is soybeans, prepared soybeans. That's what this is. And eliminates irritability and vexation. So prepared soybeans, they're usually fermented a little bit in this context. So that's dan do chi. And then right after this, we're talking about dan do juan, which is soja semen germinatum. So the germinatum these are sprouts. So these are soybean sprouts. And these clear summer heat and down heat. Now, neither of these soybean ones are super strong for this category. There's, another thing that often I might mention to people is to have miso soup when they first starting to get a thing, and that's because it has a lot of soybean products in it, and miso is sort of a prepared soybean product, and it also has green onions, which is also useful for a wind attack. It's more for a wind cold attack. So that's another little thing for people, but it's not very strong. It only works at the very beginning of a cold. So both of these are not big. And the other thing that's interesting about these two herbs is dandochi was definitely in all the books. Dando juan was in one book as a separate herb, another book as a subheading under the dandochi, and the other book didn't even talk about it. So not a very commonly used in this context sort of herb, the dando juan. But I like it as a food source in this context. I think it's not a bad thing to think about. So our next herb is fu ping, Sparadelle herba. Vents rashes, stops itching, promotes urination, and reduces swelling, especially of edema. That's not one that I use frequently. It's definitely of this category. We have Mudze, Equiseti hymalis herba. This clears the eyes, clears heat, and stops bleeding. And this is one I've used on occasion, but not frequently. Next up is very widely used, a couple very widely used herbs in this context. So, Gen. Puraria radix. This is very widely used. Releases the muscles, generates fluids, vents and discharges measles, raises yang, and stops diarrhea, and treats symptoms of hypertension. So this is particularly useful when you have a headache during a cold. And when I say a cold, I mean that this is a wind heat. It treats wind heat. So it can be a wind heat, but it also sometimes can be used with other herbs in a wind cold situation. But you have that headache. A headache from having a wind attack, and this releases the muscle, especially of the back of the neck. So really useful for that, and the shoulders and all that. So really useful herb, often used for in this category as a wind heat, but also for other formulas that help relax the muscles a little bit. Finally, ranks right up there, probably in the top 10 herbs used, is chai hu, which is Bupleuria radix, very commonly used herb. It's probably the most commonly used herb in this category of wind heat herbs, as it has lots of useful applications outside of cooling and releasing. It is one of our major herbs for others. So it resolves lesser yang disorders. So lesser yang disorder is one of those 6 stages that we kind of referred to, and we're not going to get into any more of that. So lesser yang is one of those 6 stages. Reduces fever. Here's the reason why it's used. A lot of other reasons. It spreads liver qi, resolves depression of liver qi. Those are really important. We have a lot in modern society. We have a lot of liver qi stagnation, depression, and so this is a very useful herb, and there's a lot of herbal formulas because of that action. It also raises and lifts yang qi, and Chen and Chen state it harmonizes the exterior and the interior, so it kind of balances them out to a certain extent. So that's a really interesting function of this herb. Fantastic herb. We actually don't talk about it, but there is one downside to it. There's something called the chai hu headache. Some people are particularly, I say 1 out of 10, are particularly sensitive to chai hu and then get a headache when they take it. So always kind of keep that in mind with that herb. Shengma, Cimicifuga rhizoma, is another relatively commonly used herb in this category. It vents measles, clears heat, and resolves toxicity, raises the yang, and lifts what has sunken. So for prolapses and things along those lines. And now we have a few herbs that were not in Bensky and Bensky, but were in Chen and Chen. So we have Yizhi Xiang, Veronier, Cinerae, There we go. Herba clears lung heat, sedates liver fire. We have Vutian, Viticus, Quinate, Radix et folium. Radix means root, et means end, and folium means flower. So this is root and flower. Actually, folium is leaf. Floss is flower, so folium, root and leaf. Clears lung heat, cools blood, and arrests cough. We have Shuang, Liu Huang, Veronier, Patchouli, Herba, clears heat, stops diarrhea. And Mao Zedong To, Abutilon indicum Herba, separates turbidity, opens orifices, invigorates blood, reduces swellings and abscesses, and strengthens the spleen and promotes digestion. So that is very interesting. Those 4 herbs are not herbs I'm particularly familiar with, because when I was going through school, this book wasn't even available. So we went more with Dubensky's book, an older version of it. So I'm not super familiar with these herbs, but they have some interesting functions, I'll tell you that. All right. So that's kind of a quick overview of all the individual herbs in this category. Let's compare them. Let's see why we would use one over another. So we'll talk about that. So there are a bunch of herbs here that will induce sweat, and they do it in this order. So in descending order. So the Menthe haplocalicis, Herba, the boha, the mint is really good at inducing sweat. Arctii fructus, Nibongza is another one. And we have Arctii fructus. Oh, we just said Cicada, Periostracum, Chantui, Moria folum sanguea, and Chrysanthemi floss juhua. So those are in descending orders of inducing sweat. So boha, Nibongza, Chantui, sanguea, and then juhua. Sanguea is cooler than juhua and more strongly disperses wind heat. And it's that dispersal that can cause perspiration. We said one of the symptoms of wind heat is perspiration, but one of the ways we get rid of an external attack of wind is through opening up the pores and perspiring. And we talk about often in Chinese medicine having a productive sweat versus a non-productive sweat. So like the wind heat pathogen coming in and causing perspiration is non-productive, but us opening up the things and pushing things out, that's a productive sweat. So that's what these herbs are doing. Both Chrysanthemi floss juhua and Equiseti hymelas Herba mudze are used to clear the vision. I mentioned juhua definitely. Juhua nourishes the eyes but does not eliminate superficial visual obstructions, while mudze removes membranes from the conjunctiva. So that's interesting. I'm not sure what a membrane of the conjunctiva is, but if there's something physically kind of obstructing, then I would go more for the mudze. Generally, juhua is very commonly used and useful for helping vision in general, as I mentioned. Next up, we have Soja semen preparatum. That's the prepared soybeans. Mildly vents and disperses exterior pathogens. And that's what I said. It's mild. It's not a super strong one. Soja semen germinatum, Dando Juan. This is is similar. This is the sprouts, the soybean sprouts, but its effects are focused on summertime warm pathogen disease and damp heat disorders. There's a whole category of diseases that are called summer heat patterns, and I noticed that as newer books came out, those became less emphasized than when I was going through school, and that's where this is particularly useful, is in those kind of diseases, those kind of attacks. All right, moving on. Praeria radix Gogen, Bupluri radix Chai Hu, and Simicifuge Rhizoma Shengma release the exterior and raise the yang qi. So they have a rising component to it. Chai Hu is most effective at reducing fever. Gogen disperses heat at the muscle layer, as we mentioned earlier. Shengma is less effective at dispersing heat, but is good for raising yang and relieving heat toxicity. So we haven't really talked about how heat toxicity or toxins in this context, and that's way more than we're going to be able to get into in the next 6 minutes or so. But that Shengma is a good herb for that. Gogen and Shengma are used together to promote the expression of rashes. Shengma and Chai Hu can be combined with other herbs to raise the yang qi. Juhua is stronger in clearing heat from the liver than a lot of these other herbs. And Nyobangza is used in cases where wind heat has begun turning into lung heat with yellow sputum. So Nyobangza, the way I think of it in this context, is as it's starting to move from that protective level and start to go into the chi level, you want to make sure Nyobangza is there, because that's when it will really help prevent it from going into the lung. So that's Nyobangza. All right, so those are our comparisons. Let's get into some biomedical actions of these herbs. And these are general and not specific. Some do these, some don't, all that sort of stuff. But there's lots of interesting effects of the herbs in these categories, which include dermatologic. It helps the skin. Obviously, we talked a lot about venting rashes. Diaphoresis, induction of perspiration. We talked a lot about that. Antiparesis, reduction of body temperature. So this is for fevers, anti-fevers. They're anti-inflammatory. Some of them are anti-inflammatory. They reduce inflammation. Some are antibiotic. They may have some antibacterial and antiviral functions. That's really useful. And there is a lot of studies to show that these herbs have those functions. And part of the reason why it's probably very useful for colds. They can be metabolic. Some may decrease blood glucose levels or actually increase basal metabolic rates. They are a central nervous system suppressant, so they can kind of sedate. That's that helping with the restlessness and the irritability. So it kind of suppresses the central nervous system. They can be vasodilative. They open up the blood levels and increase blood flow. They can be sedative and are antispasmodic. Some herbs in this category can reduce activity such as restlessness and spasms. Some are antihypertensive. Some can help high blood pressure. Some of them actually can hurt high blood pressure, as that raising of yang can actually make certain types of blood pressure worse. So you do have to be careful with that and look up individual herbs. They can be, some of them are diuretic and may cause urination. Some have shown some antiplatelet activities, which prevents platelet clumping and reduces clotting. Some are analgesic, may reduce pain. And some are immunostimulant, can help the immune system. So these are all sort of biomedical actions of these herbs. There are a couple drug-herb interactions. There was actually quite a few drug-herb interactions that I have in my database of drug-herb interactions. Most of them, though, were level D, and I don't say them here because that means they were either in animal studies, bench research, which means no humans were involved at all, or just an expert opinion. So level D to me does not mean there's any clinical evidence that there's an interaction. It has to go a bit above level D evidence. And you see we have one here that's level B evidence. So we'll talk about that. But before we get into that, we've seen that Mudze inhibits CYP, cytochrome P450, 1A2, and Shengma induces cytochrome P450, 2B6, and 3A4. So cytochrome P450 is an enzyme that's in our bodies that are actually part of the electron transport chain and very useful for metabolizing substances. So very useful. So and there's lots of different subtypes. That's the 1A2 and the 2B6 and 3A4. 1A2 is somewhat common. It's maybe 10% of drugs will affect 1A2. 2B6 very rarely. 3A4 is the most common one. So we are a little bit worried about Shengma and some 3A4 interactions. And all that does is raise the risk of a drug-herb interaction. Not that it will cause it or is definitive, but it's something to take into account. And then there was a large epidemiological study with an N of 1795. An N means number of subjects, so over almost 1,800 subjects. That's a big study. Showed increased adverse effects in patients taking Chaihu. So that's the one that we're talking about here. The rest are not in this category. Chizhe, Wu Weizhe, Shu, and Sheng Diwang, Mutang, and Che Qianze. These are all other Chinese herbs from other categories, but Chaihu is the one we're worried about. And they showed increased adverse effects with the antipsychotics clozapine, quetiapine, and olanzapine. And there was some level B evidence, so that means it was in humans and it was relatively, A is as high as it goes, so it's fairly strong evidence that there could be some interactions here. So just a little bit careful with Chaihu. And Chaihu is one of those herbs, it's a fantastic herb, but it needs to be used properly or there can be some adverse effects to it. All right. Some concerns with these herbs. Since these herbs release the exterior through perspiration. Overdosage, prolonged or inappropriate use can cause qi or yin vacuity or dryness. So you can over-perspire is basically what we're talking about here. Because these herbs are cooling, caution should be used in cases of nausea and vomiting or diarrhea due to cold in the stomach or yang vacuity and or cold in the stomach or yang vacuity in general and or cold or yang vacuity symptoms in general. So those, just because it's cooling and we're already worried about cooling things if there's cold, so you don't want to add cold to cold. And yang vacuity, yang, remember, is the warming part of the body. So if you're in deficiency vacuity of it, you tend towards the cold. So it's not good to have lots of cold substances. So we have to be cautious with that. Some herbs in this category should be used with caution in pregnant women. Again, there are a handful of them. If you're going to use them, look them up. But definitely do need to be concerned about that. And that is exactly 1 hour. And thank you very much for hanging in there with me. Just a reminder, when you buy from Amazon, please use the banner ad on our homepage at spurbsherbs.com. You can always get in touch with me at drgreg@spurbsherbs.com or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. That's SPERBSHERBS.com. All right. Well, thank you very much. And finally, here we have our bibliography. And I appreciate you guys hanging in there with
Herbs. The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle.
Timothy
Nick
Dobbins,
Rogers,
Campbell,